Hey guys, in this video let's review Ys, the Ode Felghana. The original name was Wanderers from Ys, released back in 1989. If you had a chance to play that copy and it didn't go that well, yeah, I don't blame you. And also that it had a really weird image on this side of the lake, but that is a topic for another video. Whatever the case, time later it was remade in 2005, but it was until 2010 that we had a chance to get this game for the PSP. With its background out of the way, let's dive into the usual topics. There's something I like so much about this entry, as it explained that this is just a fraction of the numerous adventures adults have. As far as I know, he kinda disappeared when he was like 60 something years old, but he left multiple archives where he shares his adventures. The deal with this intro is that it invites the player to dive into the journey, as if you were the protagonist, trying to immerse you like, hey, come here, live the journey. But once this small introduction finishes, we follow Adult and Doggy, going back to Felghana, where once arriving they notice a damaged monument. Think that is kinda weird. Seconds later monsters appear. Without thinking twice, Adult starts to run. How he was able to know a girl was in danger, only the celestial deities know, because he was quite far, but he made it in time to save Helena, Doggy's childhood friend. A few scenes later they are told that Felghana is having a hard time, as monsters start to spawn and merchants or travelers stop visiting the area. Another scene later they present the antagonist, a king and a soldier, talking about the whereabouts of something. And you know that where Adult the Red appears, there will be problems. So the next day there is a commotion, as the mayor is trapped in a mine with lots of monsters, and Doggy is nowhere to be seen. It is up to Adult to save the day. Now what can I say about this story? In my humble opinion, it is quite enjoyable. In terms of narrative elements, we could summarize it as a classic hero's journey, at least at some point. But the reason why I said it is enjoyable is because the game doesn't force you to dive so much into conversations or anything like that. All the Ys games were about there is an issue and you as the hero in turn must find a way to solve it. And sure, it isn't difficult to know where the story points, as later we find Chester, Helena's brother, who ends up confronting Adult, as well as the king of this place. Of course, it doesn't end there, as you will see some plots, some solid explanation of what is happening here, and why the monsters start to appear. The first time I played this game I thought I had figured it out, but meh. Unless you take your time in certain portions of the game, there is almost no way for you to know what is going to happen. And just as a side note, these games oftentimes take fractions from the Sumerian culture, and this entry is no exception. But that is just diving deeper into what it offers. For me, it is an 8. Despite being simple on a surface level, I like what is presented here. Yep, quite short for plenty of RPGs, but it is concise in its narrative elements, as well as offering an interesting cast of characters, or side characters, considering that Adult oftentimes says nothing. Gameplay-wise, this is a fast action RPG, and I don't recommend you to underestimate it. Old Ys games were quite punishing. If you know what you're getting into, no biggies, but if you do not have that much experience in action games in general, normal or even easy may be good starting points. Unlike newer entries, hard in this game is actually hard, and Nightmare is self-explanatory. Now, unless you're a hardcore masochist, I don't recommend you to play these games like that, because either you learn every single stage and enemy like the palm of your hand, or simply get frustrated as you will see no end to this adventure. With that said, the general level design in Ys the Ode Felghana is rather simple, but tricky, primarily because you do not have a map. At first, it isn't that big of a deal. The first two areas are quite easy to traverse, as they are more like straight paths, so you can get used to the controls, some small mechanics, and that the game will throw little puzzles, as turning torches on or something kind of similar. On this end, what you need to consider is that there are multiple hidden gems along the way, and I would argue that you need them to smooth experience. So if you wander into a boss room and you have but one gem when you start to find them, chances are that the area boss is going to be a bit of a pain. But let's not get sidetracked. My recommendation is to start creating your maps with notes or something like that for your reference, as the third dungeon can become kind of frustrating. That, or you can look for a map on internet. From here on out, what starts to happen is that dungeons turn quite complex, asking you to jump on specific places, dealing with multiple rooms, or to make things much more entertaining, Limit your vision while the dungeon is filled with annoying monsters that can own your arse if you try to brute force your way. Personally, I've always found two areas particularly hard to traverse, due to the number of rooms and how similar they can be. In my humble opinion, if you have a terrible sense of direction, these areas can become quite annoying. Despite that, it is fascinating the number of hidden items you can get by meticulously exploring these places. Where yep, it is best if you take some time in each region. Otherwise you may start to face other problems, as trying to change your gear or level it up. And while the customization in these games is pretty much non-existent, it is recommended to upgrade your shield and sword, or if you have the money, buy new gear, as the game has little difficulty spikes in each region, where maybe the first 3 rooms of that dungeon were a piece of cake, but suddenly the 4th room is beating the heck out of you. On this end, either you acquire new gear or grind some levels. Because while it may seem that 2 points are not going to make any difference, oh boy, those freaking 2-3 points make a lot of difference. So if you are struggling, yep, you may need to level up before proceeding any further. Despite sounding like a hassle, the Odyssey Felghana is a short game that can be finished between something like 10-15 hours the first time you play it. In all honesty, the hardest side of this game are the boss fights, as they may bully you multiple times, and there is no shame. I saw a lot of game overs in this entry. Best case scenario, at least one time every boss encounter. Worst case scenario, they will make you feel slightly miserable, like how am I supposed to beat that boss? Personally, the one I always have issues with is that freaking dragon. I've never really understood that well how to fight it. Chester can be quite troublesome in his last phase, as he starts to move like mad. Keeping track of his moves and projectiles may require multiple tries, and the very last boss is like you're playing a bullet hell. Either you take the time to learn most moves, or the grind is going to be real, simple as that. But being honest, after the mountain area, if you paid attention to some options given to you, up till the last boss, if you time your moves quite well, you can square up and become quite reckless. Is the Odyssey Felghana gameplay is a 9. For an entry from 2005, I believe it is still holding quite nicely. While it is true that there is no real customization in this game, it patches those details with its fast pace. In the graphics section I checked glitches, game performance and the general art of the game. As far as glitches go, I didn't find any issue. It never closed, had hiccups or something worth mentioning. Now what you're watching here is a comparison between the Switch and Switch 2. In all honesty, I messed up the HDR setting. I do recommend to double check them and turn them off. Do not be a moron like me who didn't see the second option at the bottom, otherwise you will have that difference in colors. But once turning it off, it looks as good as the Switch, at least in terms of colors. And do not worry, if it looks a bit laggy it's because the capture card I'm using caps at 30 FPS while on 4K. Some of you know I am not that picky on this department, regarding images and stuff like that. But once looking at both side by side, I can definitely say that the Switch 2 improves the visuals. In any case, the general art presented is of my liking, as it shows a vibrant world, filled with creative ideas. However, it is fair to say that if you have played other ES entries from around those days, you know they always have similar ideas. So in the long run, I believe they lose a bit their charm, and chances are that you may get tired of looking at those castles, ruins or similar things, as they are almost the same, with the difference that they change colors and small details that most likely you will not even notice due to the nature of this journey. Something similar may happen with the enemies. Most likely you have an idea of what you're fighting, but if you ask me, I'm always wondering about some enemies, like what in the actual heck are they? If that happens to you, as you finish the game, depending from the difficulty you unlock different parts of the gallery. And here is where you can give the enemies a better check, as they have cool pieces of concept art, or way better images so you can appreciate the nightmarish creatures Adol has fucked, since he was really young. For the common mob, I have no real issues, but once you fight some bosses, as they are quite big, you will notice that some designs haven't aged that well. In all honesty, you will see some ugly enemies, but I will let slide this point a slightly bit, considering that this is an old entry. With this, I believe a 7.5 is fair enough. I consider it slightly above decent. I like most of ideas thrown into the game, but the truth being told is that it can be tiring to look at some similar executions after a while. And last but not least, its music. As far as I know, the original composition was delivered by Meiko Ishikawa. She has worked on many other titles, like Ancient is Banished, Is Origin, Lacrimosa of Dana, some of The Legend of Heroes, Brandish, and Dragon Slayer. With the remake they rearranged every single track, and I gotta say that this is literally the best part of the game. Every time I hear this soundtrack, I imagine this kind of setting where the higher ups are like, "Hey team, here you have 3 avocados, bring us the next Is chapter," and they reserve 2 for the soundtrack alone. And oh boy, in this game you are going to find a dash of everything, some soothing piano compositions, unnerving tunes while diving into the mine, and some electronic style from early 2000, with a spice of Japan, the freaking classic pipe organ, so you can remember Castlevania or at least Thinking Dracula, and lots of extraordinary neoclassic compositions. For someone who listens to metal on a daily basis, while playing you have me going something like this. It is true that the soundtrack is kinda short, going for around 1 hour and 47 minutes with 34 pieces. Remember how oftentimes I mentioned that some games have OSTs that feel way too repetitive? Well, these kinds of compositions need to be added much more frequently on turn-based RPGs, as some can go for around 3 or 4 minutes without becoming tedious. Yep, I won't deny that some are similar, looping at 2 minutes, but they set the stage extraordinarily well. However, there is a reason why I love the first Cold Steel soundtrack much more in comparison to the other ones. If there is something I don't like about this soundtrack is, once again, that freaking dragon. While fighting it you will hear a constant flap that is annoying. If you haven't played the game, this is how it sounds. After feeling miserable for a while, it turns a bit annoying, but taking this thing out of the way, for me, the OST is a 10. If you like metal, I recommend you to give it a check to these pieces, as they are superb. Is, the Odin Felghana final score, is an 8.6. This is a really good game that I recommend if you want to dive into a short adventure that will put you a bit on edge, as it can be quite frantic due to its fast pace. But along the journey I'm sure you will find an enjoyable cast of characters and a soundtrack that you will love if you're into metal. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.